I remember the book and I can't remember the book off the top of my head, but it talked about his driver. He had a driver, and
Yeah,
he was,
Clifford Moore.
yeah, and he'd made a comment, or Clifford was trying to get into a conversation with him, and he said, not today. I need to pray while you drive.
Clifford Morris was the guy. He mentions him in letters to Malcolm, chiefly on prayer. He talks about the fact that he was reading the work of a Scottish divine named Alexander White, and he goes, Morris led him to me. And I heard an interview with Clifford Morris years after Lewis had died, and he said, I'm the guy that Lewis mentioned there. I'm the one who lent him the Alexander White thing. And Morris talked about the fact that Lewis would sometimes say that. They had good conversations. Morris even said on their drive from Oxford to Cambridge, because Lewis continued to live in Oxford when he was teaching at Cambridge University, Morris would pick him up and take him. And he said they would usually stop someplace along the way, to go to the bathroom or have a cup of tea or something like that. And he said there was sometimes they would stop at this pub. And the pubs in England are interesting. If it's a local pub, it's usually like the neighborhood living room. You'd meet your neighbors not in their home, but at the pub. And you'd have a beer and you'd talk or whatever. And in Oxford, when we lived there, I noticed that a lot of the pubs took on a certain personality. So this pub might be all the taxi drivers. This pub might be all the Oxford Brookes students. This pub might be many of the Oxford students. This pub might be where the Oxford dons and teachers would go. And then you'd get a little bit outskirts, and it would be the local pub where the people who lived in that neighborhood would hang out, and so on. So Morris said that they would be driving to Cambridge, and he said he knew this one pub where the lorry drivers, the truck drivers would stop. And Lewis would be in there and he'd order a beer and they'd be talking, and Lewis would have them all in stitches. They'd be laughing. He's a very, very humorous guy. And he'd go to the toilet, and these guys would say to Morris, who is that guy? What a regular guy. What a good guy. They knew he had a sort of posh accent. They say, born with a plum in their mouth or something like that, or a silver spoon in their mouth. Lewis was kind of upper class guy, but they saw he was just a regular guy. He could connect with even the working class. And that's again, Lewis being faithful to what he said in The Weight of Glory, where he wrote, there are no ordinary people. You've never met a mere mortal. And Lewis says everybody is either moving to become one day an everlasting horror or an everlasting glory. And the weight of glory is that we have a responsibility to each person we meet. I read through the Bible every year. I've been doing it. I don't know. I'm the 55th read through it or something like that. And I've read the New Testament 39 times besides that, Greek Bible twice. I'm not a great Greek scholar, but I can read it if I have a lexicon near my elbow to look up the occasional word I don't know. But one of the things I've noticed when I was reading through the Bible one year, years ago, I got to Chronicles, chapters 1 through 12. And I'm saying, Lord, you're omniscient. You know everything. And yet, though you're omniscient, you only gave us one thin little book compared to what you could have given us. Was 12 chapters of names in the first 12 chapters of Chronicles good economical use of the space? I've never heard an audible word from God, but I often get these prompts. And at that moment, the prompt was, to you, they're just names. But every one represented somebody I loved deeply. If you could have only known Simeon. Yeah, I know he wasn't very nice to his brother Joseph, but he felt like he was the unloved son of his father Jacob. He had vicissitudes going on in his heart, and I knew every one of them. If you could have only known, Naomi, when she had lost her husband and her two sons, and she didn't want her daughters-in-law to go with her, but Ruth stayed with her. There were vicissitudes going on in her heart and life and struggles. I knew her, and I realized to me they were 12 chapters of names, but God doesn't just love people generically. He loves particular people, individual people. Every time I read through Chronicles 1 through 12, I remind myself about how great and deep and broad and particular is God's love for people.
Mm.
And you have it in 1 John 4, it says God is love, very explicit. And the interesting thing to me is if God is love, that means he never stopped loving Satan either. Matter of fact, Satan's incorrigibility doesn't diminish God's character. God is love. The tragedy of Satan is not a deficiency in God's love. The tragedy of Satan is that somebody like Satan would become so incorrigible that he would reject the hand that's always outstretched to him, to the place of moral blindness, acrasia again, like we had talked about, in the place of utter reprobation. And it should be a warning to us that any of us can move in that direction if we step away from the love of God that's always reaching out to us. Very powerful stuff, I think.